We start with some exclusive polling for this programme that shows the extent of disruption faced by firms in the UK because of the new post-Brexit trading relationship with the EU. Well, the polling by YouGov for Ian King Live shows 52% of companies say they faced disruption since the beginning of the year due to the new trade agreement. 13% of those say they experienced a large amount of disruption. 17% say disruption has been moderate, while 22% reported a small amount of disturbance. But when you ask companies that do a moderate or large amount of EU trade, this rises to an overall figure of 80% of companies that have faced disruption, with more than a quarter saying that they have faced a large amount of disruption. Well, joining me now to talk about this, the independent business trade expert Ali Renison and Sally Jones, Brexit lead at EY. Welcome to you both. Sally, let me start with you. Are you surprised by these figures?
No, I'm not at all surprised, Ian. That's very much the kind of information that we've been hearing coming from our clients and our contacts.
And Ali, same question to you. Does this correlate with what you've been hearing on the ground?
Certainly, I think in terms of those who trade with the EU, we're seeing a significant disruption. And you have to remember that in January, it was really a perfect storm of variables, COVID, and only a few days for businesses to get to grips with the new arrangements. Remember that the trade figures for January showed a 40% drop in exports to the EU, so that tallies fairly consistently.
Ali, what I'm slightly baffled by is that in the run-up to the end of the transition period, I mean, we had lots of businesses on this programme and time and again I would say to them, are you ready for Brexit? Are you prepared for it? And they all said, as prepared as we can be. Well, clearly something went amiss with that planning, or otherwise it's proved to be worse than they expected.
I think there's a couple of different variables you have to look at. I mean, at the end of the day, we knew that we were going to be outside of the customs union and EU customs union and single market, but the level of detail, the guidance that businesses needed to actually get to grips with only came in about sort of 6-7 days before the actual new arrangements took place. And I think that's why you've seen a real sort of scramble, not only just from British businesses, but also their customers and suppliers in Europe to be actually ready to be able to deal with the fine detail of what that change was going to mean in practice. So it was a pretty perfect storm at the end of the year.
Sally, you were nodding in agreement there. I mean, during January, we heard from ministers that these were just teething troubles. Is that your sense, or is it deeper rooted than that?
No, it's deeper rooted than that, Ian, without a doubt. When we talk to our businesses, our clients, there are teething problems without a doubt. So, for example, it's taking them about 10 times longer to complete the at-border paperwork that they need to move goods across borders. But they're getting better at it, they're getting more practiced, and that time is starting to come down. But I would guess at least half of the businesses we talk to tell us that they have permanent structural problems that are not just teething problems, but are going to fundamentally change the way they do business in the future.
And do you worry, Sally, that this eventually might lead some businesses to just say, well, this is just not worth the candle, we're going to put our attention elsewhere?
Yes, I think some businesses will do that. So to give you an illustrative real-life example, William Shatner of Star Trek fame has a little online Star Trek memorabilia business, and he says that the UK is the one country that he won't keep selling to because it's now too difficult. Now, you may not want a Star Trek memorabilia phaser or tribble, but it's indicative of the fact that things are much harder for small businesses in particular to get ready to trade into the UK than they were pre-Brexit.
Ali, what's striking from our polling is that the problems, such as they are, largely affect bigger companies rather than SMEs.
Yeah, and I think that to some extent, when you look at the variables that larger businesses have to contend with, a lot more different sort of trade linkages into different parts of Europe, there's a much different sort of stream of issues that they have to contend with. Smaller businesses, I think, are actually facing as much trouble when they deal with sort of individual sort of single issues. But the larger a business grows, the more, whether it comes from immigration changes, trade and services changes, trade and goods, customs disruption, there's a lot bigger set of things to have to contend with.
Presumably, Ali, things are going to get worse rather than better, because at the moment the UK government, of course, has just extended for another 6 months the grace period for checks coming into this country. Presumably when that happens, things may get even harder.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are looking at the export side of things when, in fact, from an import side, the UK government's delayed the kind of controls that we now see for trade going into Europe. And so I think when the full brunt of that hits, that's the government, I think, is right to do that, to try and extend the areas that it can control. But, a lot of businesses who export also import. And so when you actually get the full effect of that, all these sort of delayed grace periods are going to add up. The hope is that because you've staggered some of that impact, it won't be as significant.
So, Sally, what on earth are you telling clients at the moment?
Take a deep breath, wait for the dust to settle, get through, and then once you've got a clearer idea of which are your teething problems and which are the structural ones, then it's time to act. I'm really glad that Ali mentioned services businesses, because they are more disrupted even than goods businesses in our experience. Goods businesses, just in inverted commas, have additional costs to manage, and that's hard enough. But services businesses, anyone who's dealing with behind border barriers, they can have absolute prohibitions from being able to trade. And I think that's going to be the big story coming out in months to come.
And separately, Ali, I mean, if you looked at our polling, we also asked a few questions on the pandemic. It's clear that the pandemic has had the bigger, shorter-term impact, but most people think it's going to be fairly short-lived.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting is that, the hope is, and what I think the government has to make sure that it tries to avoid as much as possible, is that even for some services businesses, a lot of businesses actually went into lockdown in December. And so the full effect, I think, wasn't necessarily felt. As sort of lockdowns start to unwind, both in the UK and Europe, you have to try and make sure as far as possible that the UK is not actually at a competitive disadvantage, that when lockdown is actually lifted, as you mentioned, a potentially short-term impact, that the UK is left, that British businesses aren't at a competitive disadvantages in terms of being able to open up and trade with their nearest neighbours.
All right, Ali, we'll have to leave it there. Really appreciate you joining me this early in the morning where you are. Sally, great to see you too, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.